The Galactic Judicial Council had built their newest courthouse to be the most impressive thing anyone had ever seen. It floated in empty space between the stars, made of some kind of crystal that caught light from distant suns and made the whole building glow. Like a giant jewel, this wasn't just any courthouse. This was where the biggest, most important cases in the galaxy got decided. Cases that could change the fate of entire planets. Judge Vorthik was the kind of being that made most people nervous just by existing. Picture a jellyfish the size of a small car. But instead of floating in water, it floated in air. Its body was translucent and constantly shifting colors. And it had 17 eyes scattered across its surface like jewels. Each eye could move independently, which meant Judge Vorthik could literally keep an eye on everything happening in the courtroom at once. The judge had been doing this job for over 300 years and had seen every trick, every lie, and every desperate legal maneuver that any species could come up with. Today's case seemed simple enough on paper. The humans from Earth were fighting with something called the crystalline hegemony over who got to mine asteroids in a belt designated as 7749X. It was the kind of dispute that happened all the time, to species claiming the same chunk of Space Orcs, both insisting they had the right to dig up whatever valuable minerals were hiding inside. The crystalline hegemony had sent their usual intimidation squad. These weren't lawyers in the traditional sense. They were living weapons disguised as legal representatives. Each one stood 12 feet tall and looked like they had been carved from a single piece of diamond. Their bodies caught the courtroom's lights and threw them back in sharp, blinding flashes. But the really unsettling thing about them wasn't how they looked. It was the sound they made. The crystallines hummed constantly, a low, thrumming noise that seemed to come from deep inside their crystal bodies. It wasn't just annoying. It was designed to be intimidating. The frequency of their humming could actually crack glass and make most organic beings feel sick and dizzy. Over the years, many opponents had simply given up their cases rather than sit through hours of that mind-numbing sound. It was psychological warfare disguised as a natural biological function. Then there were the humans. Earth had sent exactly one representative, and he couldn't have looked more ordinary if he had tried. Minho Park was a middle-aged man, wearing a simple grey business suit that looked like it had come from any department store on any human world. He carried a standard briefcase and a thermos, the kind of thermos that office workers everywhere used to keep their coffee warm during long meetings. He was maybe 5.5 feet tall, with slightly graying hair and the kind of face you would forget 5 minutes after meeting him. The contrast was almost comical on one side. You had these towering crystal beings that looked like they could cut through steel with their bare hands, humming their intimidating war songs. On the other side, you had one quiet human who looked like he should be sitting in a cubicle somewhere, filling out paperwork. Judge Vorthik began the proceedings the same way every galactic court case started. The judge's voice came from somewhere, inside its jellyfish-like body, speaking in the universal translator language that all species could understand. We are here today to determine the rightful claim to mining rights in asteroid belt 7749X. The crystalline hegemony claims prior discovery, while Earth claims legal salvage rights under Section 15 of the Galactic Commerce Code. The crystallines responded by increasing their humming, making the entire courtroom vibrate slightly. Several of the court officials, who were used to intimidation tactics, still looked uncomfortable. The sound was getting under everyone's skin, just as it was designed to do. That's when Minho did something completely unexpected. He raised his hand politely, like a student asking a question in class. "Excuse me, Your Honor," he said in a voice So quiet that the court's audio system had to amplify it. I don't mean to be a bother, but would it be possible to adjust the environmental controls? It's just a bit warm in here for human comfort. Judge Vorthik blinked 3 of its 17 eyes in what might have been confusion. In 3 centuries of presiding over court cases, no one had ever asked to adjust the temperature. The courtroom was kept at standard galactic comfortable, a temperature that worked for most species. But humans, it seemed, ran a little cooler than average. Very well, Judge Vorthik said, signaling to the court's environmental systems. Temperature will be reduced by 5 degrees. The change was subtle at first. The air circulation system hummed to life, and within a few minutes, the temperature in the courtroom had dropped just enough that most species would barely notice. But the crystallines noticed immediately. The humming began to slow down. The intimidating, mind-numbing frequency that had been their weapon started to drop in pitch and volume. One by one, the 12-foot-tall crystal beings began to move more slowly, their diamond-hard bodies becoming sluggish and unresponsive. Minho watched this happen with the mild interest of someone observing a science experiment. He opened his thermos and took a sip of whatever was inside, never taking his eyes off the increasingly sleepy crystallines. "Are the defendants feeling all right?" he asked with what sounded like genuine concern. They seemed to be having some kind of reaction. What was happening was actually quite simple, though no one in the courtroom had thought to consider it beforehand. The crystalline species had evolved on a planet that orbited very close to its sun. They were used to extreme heat. In fact, they required it to function properly. Their bodies were designed to absorb and process thermal energy, and when the temperature dropped to low, they automatically went into a kind of hibernation mode to conserve energy. Judge Vorthik watched in fascination as the crystallines, one by one, simply stopped moving. They didn't collapse or fall over. They just froze in place like living statues, their humming fading to nothing more than a barely audible whisper. "Your Honor," Minho said, setting down his thermos and opening his briefcase with practiced efficiency. "I believe we can proceed with the case now." The defendants seemed to be temporarily indisposed. Inside his briefcase weren't legal documents, as everyone had expected. Instead, there were several small electronic devices. Nothing threatening or obviously dangerous. Just the kind of technical equipment that any competent legal team might bring to present evidence or display charts and graphs. But Judge Vorthik was beginning to realize that nothing about this case was going to be as simple as it had first appeared. The humans hadn't brought weapons into the courtroom. They hadn't used any advanced technology or violated any galactic laws. They had simply asked for the temperature to be adjusted for their comfort, and in doing so, had completely neutralized their opponent's primary advantage. All 17 of Judge Vorthik's eyes focused on Minho Park. This unremarkable-looking human who had just accomplished something that seasoned military strategists would have been proud of. He had turned the courthouse's own environmental systems into a weapon, and he had done it so politely that no one could possibly object. The realization hit Judge Vorthik like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just won this particular courtroom battle. They had revealed something terrifying about their species. They could look at any situation, find the one small thing that everyone else had overlooked, and turn it into an advantage. And they could do it while appearing completely harmless and even helpful. As Minho began to set up his presentation equipment, humming softly to himself as if nothing unusual had happened. Judge Vorthik found itself wondering for the first time in 3 centuries whether it was truly prepared for what was about to unfold. The emergency alert system that connected every courthouse, government building, and military installation across the galaxy had been designed for the worst possible scenarios. It was the kind of system that only activated when entire star systems were under attack, when plagues threatened to wipe out whole species, or when some cosmic disaster was about to reshape the known universe in the 3,000 years. Since its creation, it had been used exactly 47 times. Now it was being used for the 48th time, and the reason was a single human with a briefcase and a thermos. Judge Vorthik floated behind what looked like a wall of pure energy, a containment field so powerful it could stop a military-grade plasma cannon. The field hummed with barely contained power, casting strange shadows across the emergency council chamber where representatives from dozens of species had gathered in response to the unprecedented ill. RT.VORTH, AK single quotes S17 eyes darted in every direction, never focusing on one spot for more than a few seconds, for a being that had spent centuries projecting calm authority in courtrooms across the galaxy. The Judd now looked like someone who had seen something that fundamentally changed their understanding of reality. Fellow judges of the Galactic Council, Vorthik began, its voice carrying the kind of tension that made everyone in the chamber lean forward. We have made a catastrophic error in our assessment of the species known as humans. What happened in my courtroom 3 days ago was not a legal victory. It was a demonstration of warfare so subtle and devastating that we completely missed it until it was over. The holographic recording began to play, showing the final moments of the asteroid mining case. The massive crystalline beings stood frozen like statues, their intimidating humming reduced to barely audible whispers, and there, in the center of it all, was Minho Park, calmly packing up his presentation materials as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The human neutralized our defendants using nothing more than a polite request for climate control. Vorthik continued, but that was just the beginning. Watch what happened after the case was officially closed. The recording continued, showing Minho approaching the hibernating crystallines with what looked like genuine concern. He had somehow acquired several thermal blankets, the kind used in medical emergencies, and was carefully draping them over each of the 12-foot-tall crystal beings. His movements were gentle, almost nurturing. Like someone taking care of sick relatives, he spent 20 minutes making sure they were comfortable. Vorthik said, 3 of its eyes developing what looked like a nervous twitch. Then he left handwritten notes next to each of them. Not legal documents or victory declarations. Get well soon cards. He drew little pictures of flowers and wrote messages like hope you feel better soon and take care of yourself, Judge. Moulton, who represented the silicon quartz and looked like a metallic tree with branches that moved independently, rustled with what sounded like disbelief. Moulton had been dealing with interspecies conflicts for over 500 years and had seen every form of psychological manipulation, intimidation tactic, and mind game that civilized beings could devise. Surely you're exaggerating the significance of this incident, Moulton said, its metallic voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never been surprised by anything. The humans are barely out of their primitive phase. They don't even have independent faster-than-light travel capability. Their entire civilization could be ended by a single well-placed asteroid. How dangerous could they possibly be? Vorthik's response was to replay another section of the recording, this time. It showed Minho after he had finished setting up his presentation equipment. He had opened his thermos and was pouring steaming liquid into small cups. Apparently, he had brought enough for everyone in the courtroom. Would anyone like tea? Minho's voice was warm and genuinely friendly as he offered drinks to the court officials, the translators, even the security guards. I brought extra, and it's a special blend from Earth. Good for relaxation and focus. He served tea to everyone. Vorthik said, its voice dropping to almost a whisper. the court officers, the recording clerks, the environmental technicians, by the time he finished his legal presentation. Half the courtroom staff was unconsciously rooting for him to win, not because of any legal argument, but because he had made them feel welcome and cared for. The silence in the emergency council chamber was the kind of quiet that happens when a group of very intelligent beings suddenly realize they have been thinking about a problem in completely the wrong way. Judge Moulton's branches had stopped rustling entirely. Are you telling us that the human used hospitality as a tactical weapon? It's worse than that, Vorthik replied. The hospitality was genuine. That's what makes it so terrifying. He actually cared about whether people were comfortable and happy. He turned basic human kindness into something that made him impossible to oppose. The recording shifted to show the moments after the crystallines had been neutralized. Minho hadn't celebrated or gloated. Instead, he had immediately asked the court's medical staff to check on the hibernating beings, making sure they weren't in any distress. He had researched their physiology during a brief recess and brought the thermal blankets from the courthouse's emergency medical supplies. The human defeated his opponents, then spent his own time and resources making sure they were safe and comfortable. Vorthik continued, when they wake up, they're going to remember that the person who outmaneuvered them was also the person who took care of them when they were helpless, another judge. A gaseous being that communicated through controlled atmospheric disturbances, swirled with agitation. This makes no strategic sense. Why show mercy to defeated enemies? That's just it, Vorthik said. All 17 eyes now focused on a single point in the distance, as if seeing something the others couldn't. It wasn't mercy. Mercy implies that you had a choice about whether to help someone and decided to be kind. This human helped them because the idea of not helping never occurred to him. It was automatic, instinctive. The implications of this statement rippled through the chamber like a shock wave. Every species represented in the Galactic Council had reached their current level of civilization through some combination of intelligence, strength, and ruthlessness. The idea of a species that had evolved to be genuinely, instinctively helpful to others was not just unusual. It was almost incomprehensible. They showed pity, Vorthik whispered. And somehow that single word carried more weight than any threat or declaration of war. Not the calculated pity of a superior being looking down on inferiors, but the automatic, reflexive pity of someone who sees suffering and immediately wants to fix it. They looked at beings who had been trying to intimidate and defeat them, saw that they were in distress, and their first instinct was to help. Judge Moulton's metallic branches began to tremble slightly. If that's their response to enemies, then what? Vorthik finished. Do you think they do for their friends? The emergency council chamber fell into the kind of silence that comes before very important decisions get made, the kind of quiet that means everything is about to change. 3 weeks of emergency meetings, closed-door conferences, and frantic planning sessions had led to this moment. The Galactic Judicial Council was about to unveil what they believed would be the perfect solution to their human problem. The press conference was being broadcast to every corner of the galaxy, with representatives from hundreds of different species watching to see how the most powerful judicial body in known space planned to handle one small planet and its inexplicably dangerous inhabitants. Judge Moulton stood at the center of the main conference hall, but everything about the setup was different now. Where once there had been an open podium and casual seating arrangements, now there was a fortress, 6 inches of transparent aluminum, the strongest clear material known to galactic science, separated the judge from the audience. This wasn't the kind of barrier you put up to stop someone from throwing objects or shouting complaints. This was the kind of protection you used when you expected military-grade weapons. The changes didn't stop there, flanking Judge Moulton on. Both sides were beings that looked like they had stepped out of a nightmare designed specifically to intimidate anyone who might be thinking of causing trouble. These were the Judicial Protection Corps, and they had been recruited from Kragnex, a world where the concept of peaceful negotiation had never been invented. The Kragnex species had evolved in an environment so hostile that their idea of a pleasant conversation involved at least 3 different types of weapons. They were naturally 8 feet tall, with muscles that looked like they had been carved from stone by someone who didn't believe in the concept of too much. Their skin was naturally armored, but that wasn't enough for the Council's purposes. Each member of the Judicial Protection Corps wore what looked like a small spaceship's worth of additional protection. The armor was designated Class 7, which meant it could withstand direct hits from military-grade plasma cannons, survive in the vacuum of space, and protect the wearer from temperatures ranging from near absolute zero to the surface of a small star. The quantum shields built into each suit could deflect energy weapons, redirect kinetic impacts, and theoretically stop anything short of a planet-killer missile. But the most impressive feature of each suit was the sheer amount of firepower it contained. Each Judicial Protection Corps member carried enough weapons to level a small city if they decided to have a particularly bad day. Shoulder-mounted particle beam cannons, wrist-mounted fusion blasters, and chest-mounted missile launchers were just the visible parts of their arsenal. Captain Gorik, the leader of this intimidating group, stepped forward to address the assembled media. Even by Kragnex standards, he was impressive. His armor was custom-built and painted in the traditional war colors of his homeworld, deep red, with gold accents that caught the light and made him look like a living weapon. His helmet had been designed with glowing red eyes that could track multiple targets simultaneously and project an aura of menace that made most people uncomfortable just by looking at him. Members of the Galactic Press, Captain Gorik began, his voice amplified by the armor's built-in speakers and carrying the kind of authority that came from decades of combat experience. Let me be absolutely clear about our capabilities and our mission. He raised one massive, armored fist and brought it down on the reinforced podium with enough force to demonstrate his point. The podium, which had been built to withstand accidental impacts from various alien species, cracked down the middle and would have collapsed if not for its internal support structure. The Judicial Protection Corps has been specifically designed and trained to be completely immune to every form of human manipulation. That has been identified. Captain Gorik continued, apparently unaware that he had just destroyed expensive equipment. Our armor protects us from temperature fluctuations, atmospheric changes, and any form of environmental control that might be used as a weapon. Judge Moulton activated the translation system to address the audience in dozens of different languages. Simultaneously, the psychological profiles of human behavior have been studied extensively. Our JPC bailiffs have undergone conditioning to make them immune to human niceness, as well as their apparent ability to make other beings want to help them succeed. The press conference continued with detailed explanations of the various countermeasures that had been developed. The bailiff's armor included built-in climate control that couldn't be overridden by external systems. Their helmets filtered out pheromones, emotional manipulation frequencies, and even blocked their ability to see facial expressions clearly, preventing humans from using their apparently weaponized smiles as psychological warfare. Tools, the test case has already been scheduled, Judge Moulton announced, its metallic voice carrying a tone of confidence that hadn't been present 3 weeks earlier. Earth versus the Hive Collective. Regarding territorial disputes in the Outer Rim sectors, the human representative will be the same individual who caused the previous incident. This Minho Park. What the press conference didn't reveal, and what the council didn't know, was that their intelligence about Minho Park was woefully incomplete. The background check they had conducted had identified him as a legal specialist with an unusual talent for making people comfortable and cooperative. His official records showed a career in civil law, with a specialty in interspecies commercial disputes. But Minho Park's real background was buried in files that required clearance levels the Galactic Council didn't even know existed. His full name was Major Minho Park, and his official retirement from active duty had been a carefully constructed cover story. For 15 years, he had been one of Earth's most effective psychological operations specialists, trained in techniques that could make enemy combatants surrender without firing a shot and turn hostile. Populations internalize within a matter of weeks. The techniques he had used in the courtroom weren't accidental discoveries or natural human traits. They were the result of intensive training in what Earth's military called strategic empathy, the ability to understand exactly what another being needed to feel safe and valued, and then provide it so naturally that the target never realized they were being influenced. Minho's thermos hadn't contained tea. It had contained a carefully engineered mixture of compounds designed to enhance his natural human charisma and make him appear more tea. Trustworthy and likable to a wide range of alien species. His accidental discovery that the crystallines were vulnerable to temperature changes had been the result of days of research into their physiology, combined with contingency plans for 17 different ways to neutralize them if standard legal arguments failed. Even the get-well-soon cards he had left had been part of the strategy. Earth's Psychological Warfare Division had learned that the most effective way to defeat an enemy was to make them grateful for the experience. An opponent who remembered being treated with kindness and respect during their defeat was far less likely to seek revenge and far more likely to become an ally in future conflicts. The Galactic Council thought they were preparing to face an unusually polite lawyer who had gotten lucky with an environmental control system. In reality, they were about to go up against one of the most sophisticated practitioners of psychological warfare in human history, supported by a civilization that had spent thousands of years learning how to turn basic human decency into their most devastating weapon. The test case was scheduled for the following week, and Captain Gorik was confident that his team's preparations would be more than adequate to handle whatever tricks the humans might try. He had no idea that he was about to discover what happened when human military training met beings had evolved to respond to kindness and care. The courtroom had been transformed into something that looked more like a military bunker than a place where legal disputes got resolved. Every surface that could be armored had been armored. Every system that could be monitored was being watched by 3 different backup systems. The air itself was being analyzed in real time for any trace of chemical compounds that might be used to influence behavior or mood. Judge Moulton sat behind barriers that could have protected a space station from enemy fire, surrounded by monitoring equipment that tracked everything from electromagnetic radiation to the microscopic particles floating in the courtroom's atmosphere. The judge's confidence was visible in the way its metallic branches held perfectly still. None of the nervous rustling that had characterized the emergency meetings of the past few weeks. Captain Gorik and his squad of Judicial Protection Corps Bailiffs had positioned themselves in a formation that military strategists would have recognized as a classic defensive pattern. They stood like an impenetrable wall between the judge and the area where the human representative would be allowed to present their case. Each bailiff's armor was running a continuous diagnostic check, confirming that all systems were operating at peak efficiency and that no external influences were affecting their performance. The scanning process alone had taken 20 minutes. Every piece of equipment, every article of clothing, every molecule of whatever was in the human's thermos had been analyzed by sensors that could detect threats at the quantum level. The security protocols had been designed by military experts from 7 different species, each contributing their knowledge of how their own people might attempt to infiltrate or manipulate such a gate. Hearing Dot when Jiwoo Park finally entered the courtroom, she looked almost identical to her predecessor. The same modest business suit in neutral gray, the same standard briefcase that could have been purchased from any office supply store in the galaxy. The same thermos that suggested someone who liked to stay hydrated during long meetings. She was slightly shorter than Minho had been, with longer hair that she had pulled back in a simple style that suggested professional competence without any attempt to be intimidating or impressive. The containment field around her designated area hummed with barely contained energy. It was designed to prevent any physical contact between the human and anyone else in the courtroom. While still allowing sound and visual communication, the field could stop projectiles, filter out chemical agents, and even block certain types of electromagnetic radiation that might be used for subliminal influence. The court is prepared to hear arguments in the case of Earth versus the Hive Collective, Judge Moulton announced, its voice carrying a tone of satisfaction that suggested everything was going exactly according to plan. The human representative may proceed with their opening statement. Jiwoo smiled, the same gentle, disarming expression that had become the signature of human legal representatives, and reached into her briefcase. But instead of pulling out legal documents or technical equipment, she withdrew what looked like a small photograph. Your Honor, before we begin with the formal proceedings, I'd like to share something that I think might be of interest to our bailiffs here, she said, her voice carrying the same warm, friendly tone that had characterized every human legal representative who had appeared before galactic courts. Captain Gorik's helmet automatically adjusted its visual filters to analyze whatever the human was holding. The armor's threat assessment system ran a quick scan and determined that a simple photograph posed no possible danger to anyone in the courtroom. Human manipulation tactics will not affect our performance, he declared, his voice amplified by the armor's speakers and carrying the confidence of someone who had spent weeks preparing for exactly T. His kind of psychological warfare. Jiwoo held up the photograph so that everyone in the courtroom could see it clearly. The image showed several small, free creatures with large, expressive eyes and what appeared to be naturally cheerful expressions. They were clearly young, babies of whatever species they represented, and they had the kind of innocent, helpless appearance that evolution had designed to trigger protective instincts in adult members of their species. These are called puppies, Jiwoo explained, her voice taking on the kind of gentle tone that people used when talking to children or explaining something particularly precious, their baby dogs. One of the companion species that humans have lived with for thousands of years. They're completely helpless when they're born. They can't see, can't walk properly, and they depend entirely on the kindness and care of others to survive. The photograph was being displayed on the courtroom's main viewing screen, magnified so that every detail was visible. The puppy's eyes were particularly prominent, large and dark and filled with the kind of trust that only comes from beings who have never learned to be afraid of the world around them. Captain Gorik felt something strange happening inside his armor. There was a sound coming from his suit's mechanical systems, a grinding, vibrating noise that he had never heard before. The armor's diagnostic systems were reporting that all equipment was functioning normally. But something was definitely wrong. His hands, encased in powered gauntlets that could crush steel, were starting to tremble. This particular little one is named Fluffy, Jiwoo continued, pointing to a puppy that was slightly smaller than the others, with fur that looked impossibly soft and ears that were too big for its head. She was found during a thunderstorm, abandoned and scared, hiding under a bridge where the rain couldn't reach her. The humans who rescued her nursed her back to health, and now she works in children's hospitals. The grinding sound from Captain Gorek's armor was getting louder. The trembling in his hands was spreading to his arms, and his breathing was becoming irregular. The armor's medical monitoring systems were detecting elevated heart rate, unusual brainwave patterns, and the release of chemicals that the suit's database couldn't identify. Fluffy's job, Jiwoo explained, is to visit sick children and make them feel better just by being there. She doesn't do anything complicated. She just sits with them and lets them pet her soft fur and look into her trusting eyes. The children forget about their pain for a while, and sometimes they get better faster because they have something beautiful and innocent to focus on instead of their illness. Something inside Captain Gorek's chest felt like it was breaking. The photograph was being enhanced by the courtroom's display systems, showing every detail of the small creature's face. Fluffy's eyes held the kind of absolute trust and innocence that Captain Gorek had never seen before, the complete confidence that the world was fundamentally good, and that anyone she met would naturally want to take care of her. And this one, Jiwoo said, pointing to another puppy in the photograph, is named Cookie. She's learning to be a service dog for military veterans who have trouble with loud noises and crowded places. Cookie is being trained to sense when her human is becoming upset or scared, and she'll gently rest her head on their lap or put their hand until they feel calm again. The dam broke completely. Captain Gorek, 8 feet of armored intimidation and military training, collapsed to his knees with a sound like a building falling down. The noise coming from his armor now wasn't mechanical grinding. It was sobbing. Deep, uncontrolled sobbing that echoed through the suit's speakers and filled the entire courtroom. They're so small. He cried, his voice cracking with emotion, that his military training had never prepared him to handle. They're so helpless and innocent, and they just want to help people and make them feel better, and they don't even know that the world can be cruel and someone has to protect them from everything that might hurt them. The other bailiffs were experiencing their own breakdowns. 8-foot-tall warriors trained in dozens of forms of combat were dropping to their knees. Reaching toward the photograph with armored hands that could crush stone, out were now trembling, with the desperate need to gently pet something small and soft and trusting. We have to protect them all, Captain Gorek declared through his tears, his voice carrying the kind of absolute conviction that usually accompanied military orders, every single one of them. They're depending on us, and we can't let them down. Jiwoo looked round the courtroom with the same gentle smile she had started with, apparently unsurprised by the fact that she had just converted an entire squad of elite warriors into an impromptu puppy protection service using nothing more than a photograph and a few carefully chosen words about kindness and trust. What happened next was something that no one in the Galactic Council's 3,000-year history had ever prepared for. Within 60 minutes of seeing a simple photograph of puppies, the most elite military unit in known space had completely abandoned their mission and were now filing formal requests to relocate to it. For what they described as critical puppy rescue operations, Captain Gorek had removed his intimidating helmet and was sitting cross-legged on the courtroom floor, using his armored hands with surprising gentleness to fill out adoption applications on a tablet that Jiwoo had somehow produced from her briefcase. His squad of 17 warriors, each one capable of single-handedly conquering a small planet, were gathered round him like children at story time, taking turns looking at more photographs of rescue animals and making soft cooing sounds that their voice amplifiers turned into a chorus of mechanical tenderness. Judge Moulton sat in complete stunned silence, watching as the most expensive security operation in galactic history dissolved into what looked like a volunteer orientation meeting for an animal shelter. The transparent aluminum barriers, the quantum shields, The city-leveling firepower. None of it mattered when faced with beings who had just discovered that their true calling in life was to make sure. Small, free creatures were safe and loved. Meanwhile, Jiwoo had seamlessly transitioned from showing puppy pictures to presenting her actual legal case. She spoke with the same calm professionalism that had characterized her entire appearance. As if having an elite military unit defect in the middle of court proceedings was just another Tuesday morning. At the office, as we can clearly see from the documented evidence, she continued, projecting holographic displays of asteroid mining operations and territorial boundaries. The Hive Collective's occupation of the disputed sectors began 14 months afterwards. Official claim was filed with the Galactic Commerce Registry. Under Section 12 of the Galactic Settlement Accord, this constitutes a legal occupation of sovereign territory. Her presentation was flawless. Her legal arguments were airtight. And her evidence was completely convincing. But everyone in the courtroom was finding it difficult to focus on mining rights and territorial disputes when Captain Gorak kept interrupting with questions like, "Do you think they would let me adopt puppies so they could keep each other company? And what kind of food do they eat? I want to make sure I get the good kind." The legal case itself was actually quite straightforward. Earth had properly filed their territorial claims, followed all established protocols, and had been peacefully developing their asteroid mining operations when the Hive Collective had simply moved in and taken over. Under normal circumstances, it would have been an open and shut case in Earth's favor. But nothing about this situation was normal anymore. The real shock came when the courtroom's communication system activated with an incoming priority transmission from Earth. The holographic display showed a woman in a crisp military uniform, standing in what was clearly a command center filled with advanced technology and beings who moved with the kind of fluid precision that suggested serious military training. "Judges of the Galactic Council," the woman began, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone in the courtroom immediately pay attention. "I am Admiral Han-Soo Kim, Director of Earth's External Relations Division. I believe it's time you understood exactly what you've been dealing with." Judge Moulton managed to find its voice. "Admiral, we are currently in the middle of legal proceedings that have revealed a fundamental misunderstanding about my species." Admiral Han-Soo interrupted smoothly. "Let me clarify something important. Major Jiwoo Park, whom you see before you, is not our best legal representative. She's not our most skilled negotiator. She's not even in our top 100 diplomatic specialists." The silence that followed this statement was the kind of quiet that happens when everyone realizes they've been thinking about a problem in completely the wrong way. Major Park represents what we call standard issue human capability. The Admiral continued, her abilities to inspire trust, create cooperation, and find peaceful solutions to complex problems are not exceptional by our standards. They are average, typical. What we expect from any competent adult. The holographic display shifted to show more of Earth's command center, revealing beings who moved with the calculated efficiency of apex predators. These weren't the gentle, helpful humans that the galaxy had been dealing with. These were beings whose eyes held the cold intelligence of creatures who had survived 10,000 years of constant warfare by being better at violence than anything else on their planet. "The individuals we have been sending to represent Earth in galactic affairs," Admiral Han-Soo explained, "are primarily retired kindergarten teachers, guidance counselors, social workers, and civil servants, people whose job experience involves helping others, solving problems through communication, and making sure everyone feels included and valued." Judge Moulton's metallic branches began to tremble as the implications of this statement became clear. "You mean you haven't been sending your diplomats?" "We haven't sent our warriors," Admiral Han-Soo replied calmly. "We haven't sent our generals, our intelligence specialists, our psychological warfare experts, or our diplomatic corps trained in actual negotiation and conflict resolution. We sent our people whose job it is to take care of others and make sure everyone is happy and safe. The transmission showed more of Earth's military infrastructure, beings training with weapons that looked like they could crack planets. Strategic displays showing defensive positions throughout human space, and technology that suggested Earth's military capabilities were far more advanced than anyone had suspected. So, when you ask what Earth wants, Admiral Heinzu continued, the answer is very simple. We want what we've always wanted, to be left alone in our corner of the galaxy to rescue puppies. Help people who are having problems, build nice things, and make sure everyone has enough to eat and a safe place to sleep. Jiwoo's smile took on a slightly different quality. It was still gentle and warm, but now everyone could see it for what it truly was. This wasn't just friendliness. This was the patient, careful smile of a species that had turned basic human decency into their most effective weapon, backed by the absolute confidence that came from knowing they had other options if kindness ever stopped working. However, Admiral Heinzu added, we also want to make sure that anyone who might consider threatening their peaceful existence understands exactly why the rest of the universe should be grateful that we prefer to solve our problems through friendship, environmental controls, and showing people pictures of cute animals. The vote was unanimous. The Galactic Council granted Earth complete autonomy over their entire sector, along with several adjacent regions that Earth hadn't even asked for. Captain Gorek submitted his resignation from the Judicial Protection Corps and was last seen wearing a t-shirt that read Puppy Rescue Volunteer, teaching refugee children from various species the proper technique for giving belly rubs to small dogs. In the depths of space, far from the courtrooms and diplomatic meetings, Earth's actual military continued their quiet work of making sure that people like Jiwoo and Minho would never need to reveal what humans would truly see. Capable of when they stopped being nice, the universe collectively decided that some questions were better left unanswered, and that maybe, just maybe, it was better to have humans as friends than to find out what they were like as enemies.